the father of lies, Lucifer, Satan. Just some of the names that have been used to describe the creature we know as the personification of all evil, the devil. Whatever you choose to call him, the devil is accepted as God's ultimate foe in the struggle for control of human minds and souls. Certainly, evidence of this malign being is all around us. Wars, hatred, bigotry, violence, they have all been attributed to the devil. But where did our concept of the ultimate evil being come from? To find the answer, we must begin long before human knowledge of either God or Satan existed. Hello, I'm Carolyn Morrison, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries of the Church.
I suggest that virtually every culture has some idea or even concept and certainly image of good and evil cast in terms of what is of great value to them.
Well, we could see that this has been a struggle for all of humanity since its beginning, that in every culture, in every civilization, the thinkers and the average person has struggled with the coexistence of good and evil, recognizing things that are objectively good and things that are objectively bad or evil.
If one could explain where evil comes from, one would have long since made one's mint. Evil is a mystery in the full sense of the word. It is beyond our rational capacity to probe and explain and categorize.
And we see all the great philosophers and writers and all those other great thinkers of their day have all in their own way tried to articulate and explain the existence of, at the same time, good and evil in the world, and the different ways that it could be perceived as being personified, so that is, being actually made concrete in the world.
The mythologies of Rome and Greece, the gods are created in the image and likeness of humanity. They ascribed to their gods what humanity itself would do. It created the tensions that exist between humanity and ourselves.
The problem when people hear the term myth is that they assume, well, he's writing off the devil. He says the devil isn't real. No, myth is the poetic form we have recourse to when we try to draw pictures of mystery. And we have to draw pictures because the imagination needs to process for our intellects to get to work.
Well, I think it comes very much with the influence of other pagan religions around them. Zoroastrianism, which saw good and evil as equal. And in Persia, that may have been true. But for the Israelites, there are not two gods. There is only one God. There is no God of evil. There is only a God of good. And while evil may have to be endured and coped with, in the end, good triumphs.
So the Hebrew people also, like all the other great civilizations, all the other great thinkers and teachers, tried to explain the presence of evil because they desired good. The way that the Hebrew people understood the presence of evil was two ways, but it was mostly linked to sin. So the presence of evil in an individual's life, so that would say just focusing on the individual, was the result of your sin. So I could be responsible for the sins of my fathers and my forefathers, that because of their sins, evil was present in my life.
The ancient world had many explanations for the presence of evil in the world, but only the Hebrews understood that the fate of the world lay in the hands of a single, omnipresent God. But how would they come to see one God controlling both good and evil? For the answer, stay with us. Mysteries of the Church will be right back. The Old Testament makes it clear that there was a force opposed to God's people. Equally, it seems clear that this power was under the direct and constant control of God himself. When bad things happened to good people, it was believed that this was the will of God and not of the adversary. Obviously, if the adversary was once one of God's angels, no matter what it did by the will of God. So who or what was this power, and what was its relationship to God and to mankind?
The bulk of the Hebrew Bible's narrative, what we call the Deuteronomic history, is propounding a theory. Be faithful to the covenant, life treats you well because you're in God's protection. Be unfaithful, life treats you terribly.
We call that a Deuteronomic history, where if we did evil, God punished us, then we had repentance and everything was fine. In the story of Genesis, long parable that it is, it does speak very eloquently about humanity and its quest for good, and the allurement of evil. For everything that we do, there is a consequence. Sometimes the consequence is beneficial, sometimes it's not so beneficial. The question is, why do we do what we do?
Any further concept of good and evil mythologized in terms of superhuman or preternatural forces, it's difficult to pick up in ancient or demonstrably ancient Hebrew texts or ideas. We can be fairly certain that something such as the Decalogue, we know it as the Ten Commandments, circulated for a long time, although the Decalogue speaks to moral conduct related to life in the covenant.
You have the story of the temptation in the desert. You have a worship of a pagan idol in opposition to the one God. These things began to make the distinction between whatever is for God is good, whatever is against God and the people, bad.
You go back into the Bible and almost all diseases and illnesses were attributed in some way to an evil spirit. The ancients recognized that these illnesses deprived a person of that which was unique to the human person, and we'd call it something like freedom, autonomy. This person was being held back, restrained.
The presence of an evil in Satan or Lucifer, or however you want to claim him or name him, is very limited in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Old Testament. So we see a couple times where Satan or Lucifer or an evil force was truly present.
You have also in the Hebrew text the tester, a figure who tests good people to see where their allegiance or where their loyalty lies. If you look at the book of Job, notice that the tester goes to God and says he wants to test Job, and God gives the tester permission and actually says, this you can do, but this you cannot do. So you can test him here, but don't lay a hand on his person.
Satan in Job is one of God's agents. Satan tries or tests Job with God's consent, and what he does to Job effectively is to try to make Job turn and curse God. That would be bad. So Satan functions in this case as Job's adversary, though, interestingly from our point of view, God's agent.
The obvious example of the presence of Satan in Christ's life is the temptation in the desert. We know that Christ went in the desert to pray, to be in communion with his Father, And it was there, when he was desiring to pray, to be in communion with his Father, that he was tempted. And the scriptures tell us that Satan came to him. So the scriptures speaking to us of a true presence of Satan, that he truly did exist. And tempted Jesus to give in to the greatest temptations, the greatest sins, for pride, for power, and for hunger.
The devil scenes, which are elaborated in Matthew and Luke and quite simple in Mark, are simply ways of pulling together all of the buffeting that Jesus must have experienced psychologically. What do I do? How do I do it? He must have experienced that. But did a demon with horns come up and threaten him or suggest this to him? I don't think there's any way of demonstrating that. This is an appeal to the imagination to make categories like good and evil vivid.
By the time you get to the time of Jesus, you have this belief of demons. That kind of tells us that there was a concept of evil there and that there were such things as demons.
Christianity had the good or bad fortune to be born at a time in Jewish history when the literature I've been calling apocalyptic flourished. In fact, the only examples of apocalyptic that we have in the Bible is a half of the book of Daniel and much of the book of Revelation.
In apocalyptic literature, there is an opposition to good. Those who are professing their faith are suffering because of it. So in the book of Revelation, you have a Christian community that is under some type of threat. It seems that at times that evil is triumphing here.
I think here you have a case of apocalyptic imagery influencing the canonical Gospels. At the end of the Bible in Revelation, a serpent appears again. This time the serpent is identified with all of the ferocious, and these are clearly mythological, apocalyptic forces, and it is told us that this is the devil or Satan.
So that would be a clear place where Satan was truly depicted in the New Testament, not described in physical characteristics, but the emphasis on the true presence of Satan was explained and presented in the New Testament.
The advent of Christianity had radically altered our understanding of the devil and his place in the world. But how would this new view of evil play out in society? Don't go away. Mysteries of the Church will return in just a moment. By the Middle Ages, the Church had firmly established the devil's place in the great scheme of things. Like God, Satan had become a very real and omnipresent force. For those who resisted Satan's wiles, the reward was the love of God and the protection of the Church. But for those who succumbed to temptation or even denied that the devil existed, the penalty could be swift and brutal.
The idea of the presence of Lucifer, or the existence of Lucifer or Satan, is a bit of an issue for the Church, and how that affects our understanding of God. So if God is the creator of all things, how is there also something that is present, truly present, which is not good, which could be identified as being evil?
The word diabolos in Greek means the separator, the tearer, the one who tears things apart, the one who creates chaos. The word Lucifer means to be enlightened. The problem here, I think, in this great tradition, is that Lucifer becomes evil when Lucifer realizes power that he didn't want to serve. So the question then of evil becomes one of pride and setting oneself up over and against God.
What we would automatically pinpoint as church doctrine, the only real time in the church when the church in a authoritative way spoke about Lucifer, was at the Fourth Council of Lateran in the 13th century. And basically identifying the nature of Lucifer. His nature was an angel, to serve good, but in his free will, gave over to evil.
The church holds that the devil is real, but the church makes no proclamation about what the devil looks like or any suggestion about specific modalities of his behavior. Surely evil wears many faces. And so in the poetry of homiletics, we're often inclined to describe the devil appearing in various guises. If you accept the presence of a spirit universe, and I'm not trying to be spooky here, simply to suggest that things visible and invisible do in fact inhabit this universe, then you might say that the force of evil is everywhere.
We see that when we come to the Middle Ages, and then from the period going into the modern period, that this is creating more and more of a problem in the Christian world. The church is kind of incorporated, or popular opinion or devotion has incorporated presentations or depictions of Lucifer or Satan or the devil throughout its history.
And suddenly you have all of these beastly-looking creatures, many of them with cloven hooves to imitate Pan, the god of excess, as Christianity saw it. And the apocalyptic imagination creates this cauldron of super fantastic beings in a kind of science fictional world that all the same is intended to drive home forcefully the fact that we in this world need be forever vigilant.
Especially in literature, we think most of our images of hell, of this evil force, came from writings such as Dante. And we are affected by that because, like Dante, he was trying to put into concrete, he was trying to paint a picture of this reality that we've been struggling to grasp.
The devil, Satan, and the imagery that goes with those words comes about as a way of describing the enormity and the power of evil.
Heresies, which were present from the beginning of the church, now create a problem because they're challenging that unity. So people are seeing evil present in the community, and what are they trying to do? They're trying to explain it, as we've been trying to do throughout all history. So they identify evil and say it must be because these people are engaging in this activity.
This sounds very strange to us living in the 21st century. But if you were living in the 14th, 15th, 13th centuries, this made sense. With the Inquisition, there were different ideas being voiced. Are these ideas in union with the faith, the deposit of faith, or are they not? Are they so outlandish that they ultimately are acting to dismantle this faith? So the church questioned this.
The Inquisition was at least an attempt to ask questions. What did you teach? What did you write? Let us see before we burn you at the stake. We know that the Spanish Inquisition was partly an arm of a civil government that was looking to use a modern term, ethnically cleanse the Iberian Peninsula.
So it was the civil authorities who took it upon themselves to execute punishment for religious offenses so that they could maintain power and they could maintain unity within the community.
Well, you want to make a distinction between the heresy hunters who were looking for false doctrine and the witch hunters who, for all intents and purposes, were looking to cleanse the community. The witches were like sluices through which the devil's power could infiltrate the community.
You may have had the Black Death or the plague. You may have had a certain sense of strange behavior of people, and this is seen as evil.
We're trying to explain away why everything is not good and there's evil. So they're identifying an evil, a problem, and they're finding a culprit. They're finding someone that they could blame. And that's what happened in these trials, they recognized evil and they found a quick way of identifying a cause for that evil.
But usually they were the little rivalries within the communities that resulted in this kind of excision of one or the other member. Both Protestants and Catholics were vigorous in hunting witches. It wasn't necessarily, in this case, an intellectual matter at all. A witch was usually a sort of an eccentric old lady who lived by herself and didn't have much to do with the rest of the town, and she looked suspicious.
You also had false accusations against people in itself. If there's anything evil, that calumny caused a lot of problems. So we had the witch hunts in Salem, Massachusetts, in our own country during the days of the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Yes, this can create hysteria.
Fear of Satan nearly destroyed medieval society, but the superstitions of the past no longer affect modern people. So how should modern Christians react to the temptations of evil? We'll find out when Mysteries of the Church returns in just a moment. Today, the morbid fear of witches, devils, and heretics has largely disappeared from our consciousness. But as he had always been, the devil is still there, hiding in the shadows, appearing in new shapes and wearing new clothes every time reason and knowledge gave way to fear and superstition.
Evil is attractive. It's attractive. It's glamorous. It only unmasks itself later, when it's done its damage. The more bloody, the more gutsy, the more violent, and it's attractive. It's power in some of these cases. We're attracted to power, even if that power is not for the overall good. It takes a while to see that.
And we see this time and time again in movies, that the presentation of the devil is a little more charming and kind of dashing or good looking. You know, most Hollywood presentations of the devil are no longer the initial response that would be provoked in the viewer would not be fear, I don't think. So I think there's more intrigue now in popular presentation of the devil, and no longer with the horns and the tail and the flames, which would provoke in us a certain sense of fear. So I think we are being affected in our own response to the presence of evil by the way it's being presented to us.
Well, let's start by saying that it acknowledges the box office appeal of Satan. I don't take these movies to be acts of faith in the existence of some such being. But the sensationalism that can frequently attach to movies in which the devil or some evil spirit or witch is featured as a principal actor has a tendency to appeal to the basest level of all of us.
Well, I think the temptation is always there for us to follow the road that we believe that Satan or Lucifer followed, and that was turning from good, turning from the grace, and choosing to live in evil. So that temptation remains, and the church does say that Satan or Lucifer does will that. So this is a reality that is present in our lives, that we have the ability, like Lucifer, to turn to the grace of God or to accept to live in evil and turn away from his grace.
Somehow in us, there is a propensity in the face of what's good to choose just the opposite. Why?
Again, so long as we disentangle the mythological imagery from the reality of evil and its power, we should be aware of the reality of evil and its power. But awareness of the omnipresence, the danger, and the potential that evil has to draw you into it, I think that's part of a healthy spirituality, and I think it's part of a healthy psychology too.
So we fear it in a healthy way, in the sense that we identify it, we name it, we claim it, and we say it's present. But we don't run scared because we know that as long as we don't willfully choose to invite it into our lives, it cannot take hold of us.
With the loss of Satan as a convenient scapegoat for the evil that besets the world, mankind must now assume the blame for the vast array of problems which plague our lives and society. Whether we believe in the devil as a physical reality or just as an ancient myth, the power of evil is undeniable. Is it possible that, as the French author Charles Baudelaire once said, the greatest trick the devil ever played was in convincing the world that he does not exist? But what does exist is the beauty and salvation of Jesus Christ. One's faith in God will overcome the evils that surround us, and we, as Christians, know that our belief in God will help guide and protect us in any situation we are faced with. Thank you for watching. I'm Carolyn Morrison, and I'll see you next time on Mysteries of the Church.